Mission Impossible is a long-running series that many may regard as one of the best action franchises of all time. The Mission Impossible series is also something I've never really been exposed to before. I never really grew up watching spy movies, and other than the overused references in movies and TV, I've never seen a single second of this franchise before. When my dad heard on the radio that Tom Cruise was going to be making another Mission Impossible movie, a seventh one to be exact, he asked me if I wanted to do a little movie marathon with him. So I said yes. I figured since I was watching all of these movies with him, I might as well make a dumb little video about it, ranking all of them, leading up to Dead Reckoning Part 1. Yeah, apparently these franchise movies realize that people are sick of them announcing multiple trilogies in a row, so they're just gonna pretend they aren't planning on making multiple movies and then just sneak in a little Part 1 at the very end. I see what you're doing, franchises. So here we are. I'll be honest, I wasn't expecting much, but I actually had a really good time watching these films. If anything, my dad was the one who was more burnt out by this series than I was, because he's not usually one to binge movies in general, and I don't think either of us were really prepared for how intense this marathon was gonna be. For those who don't know, Mission Impossible was a TV show that ran on CBS from 1966 to 1973. That's where all the silly spy gadgets, the main theme motif, and the "this message will self-destruct in 5 seconds" go on. It feels like the franchise just sees its source material as more of a hindrance to its cool and edgy tone, rather than a fun callback that keeps these movies tonally consistent. But trust me, we'll get all into the nitty-gritty details when we talk about each movie, so let's start with the first one. The first ever Mission Impossible movie is a fun blockbuster movie. I'll be honest, I didn't have high expectations going into it, but I think the story and the action is decently well done. Plus, the movie just looks really good. I didn't want to mention the other movies quite yet, but I think this movie gets something right that the other movies get wrong, which is the twist in the story. Obviously, the opening shot of Tom Cruise ripping off the rubber mask is super shocking and really cool for first-time viewers to see, and that's the highest praise I can give this movie in the series, is that it's the first to do it, so it's the most surprising and most shocking, hence the most enjoyable on a first watch. It was probably really cool to see such advanced high-tech and CGI from the mid-90s on screen like this. This movie follows Tom Cruise. The character's name is Ethan Hunt, actually. I keep forgetting the name of the character, I just see him as Tom Cruise. Ethan Hunt is having to clear his name from being framed by someone on his own team, along with gathering a team of people that will help him to do so. These movies do a good job of keeping you engaged for the entirety of the movie by purposely stringing along information so you don't know the full picture until the movie is over. The plots are complicated but not entirely hard to follow. More on this later. One of the shocking things this movie does in the beginning is having everyone on Ethan's team except him dying in the very first mission. There's like 7 people that die at the beginning. You find out the entire mission was set up to see if there was a mole in the IMF team. IMF stands for Impossible Missions Force. No, I'm not joking. And since Ethan was the only one alive at the end of the mission, they assume he's the mole. This sets up the themes of corruption within the IMF, since the real villain is the leader of the team who Ethan was trying to avenge the death of from the beginning, who, along with his wife, faked his death in an attempt to frame Hunt as the true mole all along. It makes more sense if you watch it. You should just watch all of these movies before you watch this video. The scene where they break into a government facility is truly iconic and has been etched into pop culture history, along with the whole rubber mask thing, of course. So I guess that's pretty cool. Ethan Hunt doesn't have a true love interest in this movie, and I think that's for the best at the end of the day for many reasons. Hunt is a character who is fueled by emotions, which kind of goes directly against what he should be doing as a secret agent, but it gives his character an emotional edge that many other secret agent characters might not have. It works more in his character's favor than in its fault, even though in reality it should make no sense. I can't tell if the writers realized this or not. The fact that Ethan is one inconvenience away from blowing up and ruining the entire mission does add stakes to the whole thing, but I'm not sure if that was on purpose or not. And that's a bit of an over-exaggeration, I will admit, but in reality, there are a lot of things he does that are fueled by emotions that can be thinly veiled as doing it for the better good of society, but also just gives him emotional satisfaction, so they kind of play both at the same time, which I guess is fine. It works out for me. I don't have an issue with it. They use my favorite basic camera trick, the Dutch angle, to show how Ethan's paranoia and lack of sleep is messing with his mind, showing how he can't really tell reality from fiction. I think it was used very effectively in this movie, and was a good use of setup and payoff. This movie franchise is really good at setup and payoff. I hope the next movies keep up the fun and exciting energy of this movie, since this one was really good. I enjoyed it.
It was better than booze. You know?
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about your automobile racing career first.
Yes.
The stakes were relatively low in Mission Impossible, which Mission Impossible 2 elevates into absurdity almost immediately. Don't get it twisted though, I really like this movie, even though I do think there are some immediate problems that need to be addressed or else it might grow into something worse. First off, I was absolutely flabbergasted with how cruise-centric this movie was. Like, the movie opens with him climbing on a giant rock all by himself just for fun, because he's supposed to be on vacation. It really feels like this scene was only really done because Tom Cruise thought it'd be cool, and he hadn't done that in a movie yet, so they just did it. I fear this might be an upcoming trend that I'm gonna have to look out for, but either way, Mission Impossible 2 follows Ethan having to recruit a criminal woman who can help them get info on a rogue IMF team member she used to date, who is aiding in a worldwide epidemic. Yeah, this is much larger stakes than my wife and I are selling information to a crime boss for money so we can run away together, and we're framing it on one of our teammates, huh? Cruise does a good job of recruiting this woman named Naya by immediately sleeping with her before they know what they want to do with her, and immediately getting butthurt when it's revealed she's gonna go undercover to get back together with her ex who they're trying to stop. Good job, Hunt. Also, there are some shots in the movie that just make me cackle with how ridiculous they are. Like, there's a shot where Naya is sitting on top of Ethan, and they have this very silly framing where her breasts are just in full view. I haven't seen a male-gazy shot that bad since Transformers, so it was a really funny moment in the movie for me. It's also a bit tragic, but, you know, that's besides the point. Anyways, I do like the action in this film. It's very 2000s and very fun. This movie is a lot more dated than the other one was, which is surprising because that one had a bunch of like 90s tech. The shot where the two motorcycles collided mid-air was very good and very cool. I became a 12-year-old boy as soon as that happened and clapped and giggled like crazy. And my dad thought it was cool too. The villain works in this film by being someone who has had the same training as Ethan, so he's almost equal in his skill. With the amount of cruise decay in this film, I was afraid that wasn't going to be a fair fight at all. But it was. Oh, I should explain the little phrase I've invented called cruise decay. It's the term I use when, as these movies go on, the more Tom Cruise-centric they become. The main reason I didn't mention most of the action in the first movie is because it mainly revolved around the entire crew and was balanced between the other characters, along with being only supplemental to the story. In this movie, some of the action scenes seem like they're only in there because they want to show Cruise being cool and awesome and an action dude. And I'll be honest, it's a bit much for me. Even though this is most definitely not the case, the first movie felt like an action movie that they just happened to cast Tom Cruise in the lead role for, or it was a script that was kind of floating around and it came across Tom Cruise and he was like, I'm gonna be the lead actor in that. And the movie wasn't all about how cool Tom Cruise was, but this one feels like that. Mission Impossible 2 just a little bit feels like a Tom Cruise vanity project, and I don't know, it just makes me think of him as a little bit lame in hindsight. I really hope the Tom Cruise and Mission Impossible stans don't get upset with me. I went into these completely blind, and I had no idea they were going to turn into this so quickly. Either way, I'm really excited for the next one again, because this one was really good as well. And I heard the next one was directed by J.J. Abrams, so now I'm really excited. Also, I don't know how I forgot to mention this in the previous two sections, but the character of Luther is very important. He's like the main hacker guy that Ethan works with. Something I realized early on in these movies is that like anyone can become like a field worker and not just working behind the desk, but like certain people in the IMF have certain specialties. Like it's very clear that Ethan's is like stunt work. He's more on the physical element versus characters like Luther and later Benji are more like on the technical element. But of course, you know, they're still allowed to do like cool martial arts and hold guns and stuff. It's just cool to see that they all have different unique backgrounds and specialties when they work at the IMF. It's an interesting element, you know, it feels like a real company, not just like some thing that's an excuse for Tom Cruise to do stuff.
Yeah, I love racing. I've always loved cars and racing and watched on television growing up.
Yeah.
And, worked with Newman on Color of Money.
This movie sucks. We've officially reached peak cruise decay, and this movie is absolutely awful. I really don't know how we got here. I forgot to mention that in the previous movie, Ethan and Naya stay together at the end, and we're seen passionately hugging and being in love with each other and stuff. In this one, we all of a sudden have a new girl as his fiancée. I understand it's perfectly fine for him to be dating another woman in this film. It's not like I expected for him to stay with Naya for the entire series. I even joked with my dad as we watched these movies that every film would end with him gleeful and happy with a new woman every time, and how absurd that would be. And this movie did come out 6 years after the previous one, so we could assume that he and Naya were together for years before naturally growing apart, and he just happened to find his forever partner after that. I'm just gonna pretend all that context is just the quiet parts in this movie. Mission Impossible 3 follows Ethan as he is officially retired, betrothed and affianced, and is lying to every person in his life. He has a completely separate, non-secret agent type job in this new life of his, and I can't help but think maybe he should have told his future wife that he was a secret agent in a past life before getting down on one knee, but I digress. Mainly for her own safety, honestly. Because, she does end up getting kidnapped in this movie. Maybe giving her some warning by, knowing that this kind of stuff could happen would have been nice. He's brought in for one last mission, since they need the best of the best to get this really scary sounding weapon we only know as the Rabbit's Foot away from being taken by some crime lords. I won't beat around the bush with this one. The Rabbit's Foot is nothing. They never decided what the Rabbit's Foot is, and they never tell us what it is. The entire time Ethan Hunt is trying to recover nothing. And there are no stakes at all. This is so clearly J.J. Abrams' stupid mystery box thing all over again, which I don't think I need to clown on since many people have done it before. But I've never seen this concept taken to such absurd degrees as it is in this movie. Fuck J.J. Abrams. All my homies hate J.J. Abrams. The action in the plane scene specifically is shot and edited really weirdly. They use that awful trend of shaky camera where you can't tell what's happening, most likely to cover up a lack of proper footage to use, and maybe they didn't get some good shots, so they just kind of blur everything so you don't really know what's happening. It honestly kind of disorients the audience a bit, at least it did for me. Also, I'm not one to shy away from gore. I like quite a gruesome scene from time to time, but they have a shot of an agent dying by having a tiny bomb go off of her brain, and her face just looks awful as it happens. The shot of her immediately dying without even realizing it is ghastly and really impactful, but after that they just continue to keep showing the awful shot of her lifeless corpse, and it's so unnecessary. This is such a small nitpick, but it really rubbed me the wrong way. It just makes me think, did no one think that was weird at all? Anyways. The only good thing about this film is that it introduced Simon Pegg's character, and I like him quite a lot. Benji is an important character for the rest of these films, and is a welcomed presence, because he is quite unique. I kind of like the little rogues cast that they've built around the character of Ethan, with Luther and Benji, and now Brent, I think is his name, who was played by Jeremy Renner, my favorite app owner. I'm not gonna keep that joke in. This was pre-Avengers too, so I guess this was what really put his name out there in the action scene world. Again, this movie ends with Ethan happy and satisfied as his now wife, who he married very quickly before he went out on his final mission in case he didn't come back. The final scene had me really worried for how the next movie is going to handle this new shift in the status quo. I really hope they don't just hit that big restart button like they've done in the previous two movies. I noticed that J.J. Abrams has a trend of introducing things into movies that are supposed to be in the middle of a group of films, and then the writers having to write it out and just cut it out completely once the next one comes along. So I really hope that one doesn't happen in this movie.
Actually, he offered, and I said, that'd be terrific. So we went out to a quarter-mile track, and he knows a lot of people in racing. They brought some cars up, and we just drove around the quarter-mile track, and he said...
It happened in the next movie. I'm just joking. They actually do address the fact that Ethan's wife, Julia, isn't in this movie, but in a way I can only imagine caused many sleepless nights for the writers to deal with. Mission Impossible 4, Actually, the rest of these movies don't have numbers attached to them, so this one is actually called Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. Ghost Protocol follows Ethan as he and his slapdash team have to save IMF from being framed for a bombing in Kremlin that was orchestrated by a nuclear extremist who plans on starting World War III. Again, the stakes in these movies just flip-flop back and forth. Like, the last one meant nothing, and this one is like war. Nuclear war. The movie reinforces the fact that the IMF is a private agency that the US government rents out to do important missions, and that when a mission goes south, the government has no issue with putting all of the blame on the IMF. So this movie has an interesting task of showing the audience how Ethan and his crew plan to stop this global threat with no money and no resources whatsoever. I do quite like the spin that this movie takes. It's at least exploring this idea of like what the IMF is a little bit more. I really appreciate it. For example, the big money shot action scene in this film shows Tom Cruise having to scale a very tall building made of glass with sticky gloves. And he only has to do this because Benji needs to get access to the hotel security cameras and elevators, which is something the other movies have just glossed over as an easy task for the crew to do, but only because the IMF had the resources to do so, and now that they're on Ghost Protocol, they don't. Also, this movie technically has no rubber masks that the main team end up using because their mask maker breaks mid-construction, so that's a cool insight to have. In the previous one, they showed us the mask making machine and how it can fit inside a briefcase, and they showed the full process of what it's like to mask up, so I liked that quite a lot. There's still plenty of look at this hot girl who can kill you in a tight-fitted dress in this film, but at least it's only done for the audience and not for Ethan to leer at and enjoy. I don't know, I've always felt creeped out when Cruise had to look at a girl sexily or engage in a PG-13 activity with a woman, because his eyes always seem to just glaze over in this odd way I never notice in other actors. It just makes me uncomfortable personally. I know it doesn't really matter, I shouldn't have mentioned it at all, but still. These past two movies have really saved me from this notion because Ethan is happily married in the last one, and is grieving an implied off-screen nasty divorce in this one. Yeah, they just divorced her off-screen. Actually, midway through the film, they imply that the writers did something much worse, which is brutally kill her off in a way that would not allow any sort of comfort for the audience or Ethan whatsoever. But then they bait and switch you like they do with every other plotline in these stupid movies, and they reveal that Julie and Ethan arranged for her to fake her death and go on living a life away from Hunt and his silly endeavors and espionage. I bet the writer who came up with that solution got the biggest raise of a lifetime, since this movie had the impossible mission of getting rid of the lame wife that Abrams introduced in a way that was emotionally satisfying and didn't look like backpedaling whatsoever. So no divorce, no killing her off, and no just keeping her around. They really weaseled their way out of that one. Besides all that, however, I think this movie is a very welcome change of pace from the previous one, and in many ways feels like a course correction. I was not excited to watch this movie at all, but was pleasantly surprised, so let's hope that's the case for the next one.
So I drive a GT3 car for his race team.
Now, what does that mean when you say GT3? What is that exactly?
Well, it's like, there's GT1, GT2,
Oh, I see.
GT3, GT4.
It seems like the group of now 6 Mission Impossible movies have been split into 2 separate trilogies, which both reflect the signs of the times. The first 3 movies all came out within 4 to 6 years between each other, and clearly represent the times they were made in. Mission Impossible 2 is the most year 2000 movie I've ever seen, and Mission Impossible 3 is the most 2006 movie I've ever seen. Same goes for the original 2, it's an intensely 90s action movie through and through. But these last 3 movies all came out within around 3 years of each other, which is half the amount of time. So that's reflected in how 2010s they all feel. So these last 3 movies might accidentally blur together in my head, so I apologize if that happens. Mission Impossible 5, Rogue Nation, follows the IMF being dismantled by the US government and absorbed by the CIA. All while Ethan is seen as a crackpot conspiracist who believes in a string of attacks that are all related to the secret agency called... Shit, what is it called again? The Syndicate. Okay. the Syndicate. He believes that there's a fake evil organization underground called the Syndicate, and no one believes in him. But of course he's right, because he's Ethan Hunt. I know I did mention the Impossible Girls in the previous segment. That's what I'm calling them. I'm calling them the Impossible Girls. But I do want to make a point of how the Impossible Girls both work in a good way and a bad way for these films. Obviously, I like and have no problem with lady spies being awesome, and I don't even mind the girls showing some skin. I find the pretty dresses the girls wear infinitely more cool than the boring suits Cruz and the rest of the dudes have to wear when they're on espionage mode. But it feels in such bad faith, like I said earlier, like they're only doing this to show off to the camera and not for any importance in the film. Like in this movie, the female spy, who is like this movie's Impossible Girl, she's like getting changed into like a different outfit because they're done with this segment of like the plan, and she just like fully strips in the background and they do like a money shot of it, and I'm like, she's just changing. Like, what about that is hot? It's just so weird. Like I said, I don't mind women getting naked for movies. Like, it's not something that bothers me at all, but that's just bad filmmaking through and through. Anyways, doesn't matter. But you know what? It does matter, because I could say the same thing about all of the overly long action sequences, because they get really tiring over time. Yes, they broke up the car chase sequence in this movie with a fun and silly car wreck, but then they immediately resumed it, this time with motorcycles, and I'm left wondering if it only serves to pad out the runtime, or if people actually enjoy these really long scenes. And maybe it's a good time to kind of close your eyes and rest a little bit in the theater. This movie isn't bad though, I did enjoy it, and we get to see Hunt working against the good guys. I put good guys in quotes, trust me. And this time going on his own to clear his own name and save the lives of many. Wait a minute. This is like the first movie again. I really hope they're not doing a Star Wars with this series. That would be a lot to deal with. This movie's good though. I like it. It's enjoyable. It actually references the fact that the previous movies exist, and I see that that's the case for the next one, so I like it. Good movie, guys. Good job, everyone.
Does it bother him that you carried him in that movie?
What's that?
It's just a joke. Let's do a commercial and then we'll be back.
Wow, these last 3 movies have actually been pretty good. I really enjoyed this one, actually, which is quite surprising to me. You know, I actually really enjoyed this movie. I'm glad I got to watch it. The thing I liked the most was Henry Cavill's beard, because it's the whole reason why the Justice League movie was so bad. I'm just kidding. My real favorite reason why I like this movie so much is because it actually connects back to the previous movies. Mission Impossible 4, Fallout, continues the story of the Syndicate set up in the previous movie, by bringing the character of Lane back as a pawn to retrieve stolen plutonium that's going to be used to start nuclear war in an attempt to bring about the new world. These past 3 movies have all brought about characters who are nuclear extremists who believe that the destruction of the world will bring a common peace. You know, the Thanos way of thinking about global politics. I won't get too much into it because it's a little too heady for a lighthearted video like this, but you know, there's at least some strong themes within these last 3 movies, and I appreciate that. I also appreciate how all of these movies actually matter to one another. I like that there's a real threat that the team needs to stop, and not just nothing, like in Mission Impossible 3. Sorry, I'm still not over that. I was surprised to see how meta the 2010s Mission Impossible movies had become, with the CIA's discussions of the IMF being a not-so-subtle allegory for how the public views Mission Impossible movies themselves, basically calling them outdated, gimmicky, lame, but then these movies prove time and time again that they actually are worthwhile and that their gimmicky nature provides solutions and, in the real world, enjoyment, so there's something there. I would usually mind something like this in a movie, but it's very much in the background, and it doesn't really affect the plot at all, so it's just a footnote to mention. Also, they bring back the wife! Julia makes a comeback in this movie, at first in just dream sequences, but then in the flesh itself. I'm glad they actually gave this story arc a real conclusion instead of just ignoring the problem altogether, giving Ethan real trauma and guilt regarding what he's done to Julia by making her have to abandon her life and become a ghost. It's a really interesting thing to do, and finally giving that storyline closure by having her forgive and thank him for all he's done, it's nice and satisfying to see. Also, I think the conclusion of that storyline is setting up Ilsa and Hunt in a romantic way, which I guess I don't mind. Like I said, I prefer when the character of Ethan has no romantic inclination at all, but I understand that a romantic subplot kind of pulls people in a lot and also can pad out the runtime, so I won't be too mad about it. So yeah, I enjoyed this movie quite a lot. My biggest criticism is that the movie's just too damn long. It's just under 2 hours and 30 minutes long, and there are plenty of times where I was shocked to see the movie was still going and that there were hours left in the story. I think the action sequences kind of drag a little bit. I like that they're very well edited, but there's a lot to it, and I guess it shouldn't be that big of an issue because watching it in theaters is not a problem versus like me in my living room. Also, it looks like the next movie is going to be even longer than this one, so that's something I'll have to look forward to. This was a very interesting journey to embark on. My dad and I were exhausted and excited to finally get this series done so we could be ready to watch the new one in theaters. So allow me to give you my official ranking and recommendations. I feel like it's a bit of a cop-out to say the first one is my favorite, but when it comes to tone and execution, it's the one I find myself actually wanting to watch again outside of this whole marathon. And I guess after that, Mission Impossible 4? Maybe? I think Ethan and the crew having to work with literal scraps to stop nuclear war is a novel enough concept for me to call it my favorite. Also, I just love Jeremy Renner. And I don't quite know why, but Mission Impossible 2 feels like a safe third listing for me. It's very campy and very absurd, but it's way less complicated than the rest of this series is, so I think it gives an edge in my book. Mission Impossible 5 and 6 kind of blur together for me, so I'd say those are my two next ones. I think they're really good standalone movies. I think I prefer 5 over 6 just because 6 was so long, but I quite liked them. They were pretty high in a ranking. And of course, at the very bottom is Mission Impossible 3. What an absolute dog shit movie. I wish I never saw it. Honestly, I recommend you only need to watch the last 3 movies in this series if you want to be set up for the new movie. It seems like Mission Impossible 7 is also going to continue the story these past movies have been setting up, so if you don't want to be confused by the plot, then all you really have to do is watch 4, 5, and 6. Technically, 3 does matter since it sets up story elements that are going to matter later on, but I really don't recommend it because it's awful. I think you're good just going off of context clues, and you're smart, you'll get it, don't worry. Other than that, thank you for watching. I kind of last minute decided I wanted to do a little blockbuster series after I talked about Charlie's Angels in my previous video. So we'll see where we go from here. Of course, I mostly talk about Disney Channel and kids media on this channel, so if you're interested in like campy children's vampire TV shows or Cole and Dylan Sprouse, then feel free to subscribe. I'm probably going to talk about a few other blockbuster movies before officially dropping my Sweet Life on Deck video, which has been in the works for months now. It's going to be very long. So if you're interested in all of that, then, like I said, subscribe, like the video, leave me your ranking and your opinions on these movies in the comments below. I might have a very opposite opinion to a lot of other people. I have actually seen a lot of people say they love Mission Impossible 3, so if you feel that way, feel free to tell me. I really want to talk about these movies with people because I have no one else who has seen these besides me and my dad. So yeah, thank you for watching. Hope to see you in the next video.